Hey guys, tonight we begin with something truly haunting. A time when death arrived on ships, spread through streets like wildfire, and claimed entire families in a matter of days. We're diving into what it was really like to survive during the great plagues of medieval Europe. Forget the romantic tales of knights and maidens. The truth is, you probably wouldn't have lasted a week. So before we descend into this dark chapter of history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we explore here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It's always fascinating to see this community coming together from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise, and let's ease into tonight's journey together through one of humanity's darkest hours. It's 1348, and you wake up to a sound that's become horrifyingly familiar. The creak of wooden wheels on cobblestones. The death cart is making its morning rounds through your neighborhood in a small English town, and the cart driver's voice echoes through the narrow streets. Bring out your dead. It's a sound that used to shock you, that used to fill you with dread and disbelief. Now, 3 months into the plague's arrival in your town, it's just another part of mourning, like a rooster crowing or church bells ringing. Except this call is collecting corpses instead of announcing the hour. You lie in your bed, a straw-filled mattress that you share with your wife and your one remaining child, your daughter Agnes, who's 7 years old. You had 3 children when the plague arrived. Your son Thomas died in the first week, his body covered in the black swellings that give this pestilence its name. Your youngest, little Margaret, lasted only 2 days once the fever took her. You watched them die. You held them as they burned with fever, as they coughed blood, as the buboes, those grotesque swellings in their necks and groins, grew larger and darker. And then they were gone, loaded onto that same cart you're hearing now, taken to the plague pits outside town where bodies are stacked like cordwood and covered with quicklime. Your wife Elizabeth stirs beside you. She's been sick for the past 2 days. It started with a headache and chills, and now there's a small swelling beginning to form under her arm. You've both been pretending not to notice it, but you know what it means. You've seen it too many times now. The buboes always start small, just a tender lump, easily ignored or dismissed as something minor. But within hours they grow, becoming agonizing masses of infected lymph nodes that turn the skin black and purple. Some burst, releasing foul-smelling pus. Others just grow larger until the victim dies from the systemic infection, the fever, or the internal bleeding that causes them to cough up blood. You reach over to touch her forehead, and the heat radiating from her skin confirms what you've been dreading. She's burning up. The fever has taken hold, and with it, her chances of survival have dropped dramatically. Some people recover from the plague. You've heard the stories, seen a few survivors yourself, marked by the scars where their buboes burst and healed, or missing fingers and toes lost to the gangrene that sometimes accompanies the disease. But most people die. 3 out of 4, maybe 4 out of 5. The exact numbers don't matter when it could be your wife. How are you feeling? You ask, though you already know the answer. She tries to smile, tries to be brave for Agnes's sake, for your sake. Just tired, she whispers, but her voice is weak, and when she tries to sit up, she winces in pain. The bubo under her arm is growing, and the pain must be excruciating. You've heard people describe it as feeling like they're being stabbed from the inside, like their body is being torn apart by unseen hands. Agnes is still sleeping, curled up at the foot of the bed, and you're grateful for that. Let her have a few more moments of peace before she wakes to this new reality. You've already lost 2 children to this plague. The thought of explaining to your last remaining daughter that her mother is also sick, that she might also die, is almost too much to bear. But there's no avoiding it. The plague doesn't care about your feelings, doesn't care about fairness or justice, or the fact that your family has already suffered enough. The room you're in is small, typical of medieval urban housing for common folk. The plague has made everyone poorer. Trade has stopped, markets are empty or closed entirely, and those who still have work are often too afraid to go out and do it. You're a carpenter, or you were before the plague. Now there's no demand for furniture or repairs when a third of the town is dead, and another third is dying. The only work available is digging graves, and even that is in short supply because the gravediggers themselves keep dying, and fewer people are willing to take their place. Your home is a single room in a half-timbered building that leans slightly to one side. The thatched roof leaks when it rains, and the gaps in the walls let in cold air and the smell from the street, which has become increasingly foul as the plague progresses. Bodies aren't always collected promptly. Sometimes they lie in the street for days, rotting in the summer heat, and no one wants to touch them. The fear of contagion is so powerful that families have abandoned their own dying relatives, leaving them to suffer alone rather than risk catching the disease themselves. Through the small window, you can see the dawn light struggling to penetrate the smoke that hangs over the town. People are burning everything, clothes, bedding, anything that belonged to plague victims, believing that fire will purify the air and stop the spread. They're not entirely wrong, though they don't understand why. The smoke creates a haze that mixes with the morning fog, giving everything a surreal, hellish quality. Some people say it looks like the end of the world, and honestly, it's hard to argue with them. You hear voices from the street, and you recognize them. It's the Goodmans from the house next door. They're bringing out their father, old William, who must have died during the night. You hear his daughter Sarah sobbing, and the cart driver's gruff voice trying to hurry them along. He has many more stops to make, many more bodies to collect. The death toll is so high that the church has stopped keeping accurate records. The priests, those who haven't fled or died themselves, simply mark plague in the parish register next to dozens of names each day. Your wife coughs, a wet, rattling sound that makes your blood run cold. It's the same cough Thomas had, the same cough that preceded him coughing up blood in his final hours. You grab a cloth, an old piece of linen that's already stained from previous use, and hold it to her mouth. When she's finished coughing, you fold it quickly, not looking at whether there's blood. You don't want to know. Not yet. Let her have this morning, whatever's left of it. Agnes wakes up and her first words are, "Is Mama sick?" Children always know. They can sense when something is wrong when the adults are frightened when death is near. You nod slowly, and Agnes's face crumples. She's 7 years old, and she's already been to more funerals than most adults attend in a lifetime. She's watched her siblings die. She's seen her friends disappear, their houses marked with red crosses to warn others away. She knows what this means. You pull yourself out of bed, and the cold morning air hits your body. You're wearing the same clothes you've worn for weeks now. Changing clothes, washing them, these have become dangerous activities because water might be contaminated, and who knows what miasmas might cling to fabric. The medieval understanding of disease is all wrong, based on the theory that bad air, corrupted by planetary alignments or divine punishment, causes illness. But wrong understanding doesn't make the fear any less real or the precautions any less desperately necessary. Your feet hit the floor, and you notice something that makes your heart skip a beat. There's a small, tender lump in your groin. It's barely noticeable, just a slight swelling, but you know what it could be. You felt this before on Thomas, on Margaret, on dozens of neighbors and friends. It's how the plague announces itself. First the lump, then the fever, then death, usually within 3 to 5 days. Some die faster. The lucky ones, if you can call them that, die within hours. The unlucky ones suffer for a week or more, their bodies covered in buboes, their minds lost to fever and delirium. You stand there, frozen, feeling the small swelling with your fingers. Is it really a bubo, or is it just a normal lymph node, swollen from some minor infection? Everyone is hyper-aware of their bodies now, checking constantly for signs of plague, and sometimes imagination makes healthy people believe they're sick. But this feels different. This feels real. And if it is real, if you're infected, then you have days at most. Days to say goodbye to Agnes, to watch your wife die, to put your affairs in order, though what affairs are there to put in order when death is everywhere? The death cart moves on, its wheels creaking, and you're left standing in the gray morning light, feeling the lump in your groin, looking at your feverish wife, and wondering how this became your life. How did the world go from normal to nightmare so quickly? Just 6 months ago, things were fine. You had work. You had 3 healthy children, you had hope. The plague was just a rumor, something happening in distant ports in foreign lands. Now it's here, it's in your house, it's possibly in your body, and there's nothing you can do but wait and see who survives, if anyone survives. This is day 1 of your survival attempt during the medieval plague, and already, you're not sure you want to survive it. Standing there in the cold morning air, feeling that lump in your groin, you're suddenly aware of every sensation in your body. Is your head hurting? Yes, slightly, but is that the plague or just tension and lack of sleep? Do you feel warm? Maybe, but the room is stuffy and you've just woken up. Are your joints aching? They always ache. You're a carpenter who spent years working with your hands and body. But now every normal ache and pain becomes a potential death sentence. This is what the plague does to people. It creates a paranoia so intense that healthy people convince themselves they're dying, while actually sick people sometimes deny their symptoms until it's too late to isolate themselves. You've seen both extremes. Your neighbor Richard swore he had the plague and locked himself in his house for 2 weeks, refusing to come out, only to emerge perfectly healthy, having starved himself nearly to death over nothing. Meanwhile, Peter the blacksmith insisted his fever was just a summer cold until he collapsed in his workshop with buboes the size of eggs covering his neck, and died before anyone could even move him to his bed. The symptoms of the plague are well known by now. Everyone in town can recite them like a morbid prayer. It starts with fever, chills, and headaches. Then come the buboes, those swellings in the lymph nodes, typically in the neck, armpits, or groin. They appear suddenly, growing from barely noticeable lumps to massive, painful masses within hours. The skin over them turns dark, purple-black, giving the plague its name, the Black Death. Some victims develop a rash of dark spots, subcutaneous bleeding that looks like ink stains spreading across their skin. Others cough blood, their lungs filled with infection. Many become delirious, their minds consumed by fever, screaming about demons or angels, seeing visions of heaven and hell. Death comes in different forms. Some people die from the infection itself, their bodies overwhelmed by bacteria spreading through their bloodstream. Others die from complications, pneumonia if the plague reaches their lungs, septic shock if the infection goes systemic, gangrene if blood flow to their extremities is cut off. The pneumonic form is particularly terrifying because it spreads through coughing, through the air itself, and kills even faster than the bubonic form. When someone develops pneumonic plague, everyone around them is at extreme risk, and isolation becomes critical, though that's easier said than done in medieval housing where entire families share single rooms. You look at Elizabeth again. She's sitting up now, trying to hide her discomfort, but you can see the pain in her eyes. The bubo under her arm is visible now, a dark swelling about the size of a walnut, and it will grow larger. You've heard the physicians say that if a bubo bursts and drains, the patient sometimes survives. The body is expelling the infection, they claim, though their understanding of why is based on the humoral theory that disease is caused by imbalances in bodily fluids. They're accidentally right about drainage being helpful, but for completely wrong reasons. Agnes has moved closer to her mother, and you want to pull her away to protect her from exposure, but what's the point? You're all living in the same small room, breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces. If Elizabeth is infectious, you've all been exposed. The modern understanding of how plague spreads through flea bites from infected rats wouldn't be discovered for another 500 years. Medieval people blamed bad air, miasmas, corrupted by the alignment of planets, by Jews poisoning wells, by God's punishment for sin. They were grasping for explanations, for some way to make sense of the senseless death surrounding them. The theories about plague transmission are as varied as they are incorrect. Some physicians believe it spreads through sight, that merely looking at a sick person can infect you. Others blame it on certain foods, on sexual activity, on bathing, which is why many people have stopped washing. If water can carry plague, better to stay dirty and alive than clean and dead, they reason. Some believe that flowers and strong scents can ward off disease, so people stuff herbs and posies into their clothes, creating the nursery rhyme, "Ring around the rosy," that will persist for centuries, a children's song about death. The plague doctors, those few physicians brave or desperate enough to still treat patients, wear distinctive costumes that will become iconic. The long, beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs and spices, meant to filter out the bad air. The long, waxed coats and gloves, designed to prevent miasma from touching their skin. The canes they use to examine patients without direct contact. They look like creatures from a nightmare, and for many plague victims, these masked figures are the last thing they see before death. The doctors try their treatments, bloodletting to balance the humors, lancing the buboes to drain them, applying poultices made from herbs, sometimes placing live chickens on the buboes because animal heat is supposed to draw out the poison. None of it works consistently, and the doctors themselves die at alarming rates despite their protective gear. You need to make decisions now. Do you call for a physician? They charge fees you can barely afford, and their treatments are questionable at best, fatal at worst. Do you try to care for Elizabeth yourself? You have some herbs in your small collection, things like garlic and onion that are supposed to have healing properties, but you have no idea if they'll help. Do you pray? You've prayed constantly since the plague arrived, and it hasn't saved Thomas or Margaret or the thousands of others who have died. The churches are full of desperate people begging God for mercy, but the plague continues unabated. Some people believe the plague is divine punishment for sin, and various groups have formed to atone. The flagellants march through towns whipping themselves bloody, believing their suffering will appease God's wrath. You've seen them, processions of men stripped to the waist, scourging their backs with leather whips embedded with metal, blood streaming down their bodies as they chant prayers and hymns. The church officially disapproves, but local authorities often tolerate them because desperate people need something to believe in. Some action they can take against the invisible enemy killing their families. There's also the paranoia about plague spreaders, people accused of deliberately spreading disease. Jews are the most common targets, accused of poisoning wells or casting spells. You've heard rumors of massacres in other towns, entire Jewish communities burned alive by mobs seeking someone to blame. Some claim that lepers or foreigners are spreading plague, that beggars are contaminating food supplies. The accusations are absurd, but fear makes people irrational, violent, desperate for scapegoats when they can't fight the real enemy. Your stomach is churning with fear, with the knowledge that you're almost certainly infected, that Elizabeth is definitely infected, that Agnes might be next. The lump in your groin is still there, still tender, still growing. You press on it gently, and the pain shoots through your body, confirming what you already know. This is a bubo. This is plague. You have days, maybe hours, but you can't just give up. Agnes is watching you, her 7-year-old eyes wide with fear and confusion. She's already lost her siblings, and now she's watching her parents succumb. You need to be strong for her, need to give her some chance of survival even if yours is already forfeit. You need to feed her, keep her warm, maybe find someone who will take her in if you and Elizabeth die. These practical concerns are what keep you moving, what keep you from simply lying down and waiting for death. You walk to the small table where you keep your water jug. The water is probably fine, drawn from the town well yesterday, but who knows? Some people refuse to drink well water, believing it's contaminated. They're buying wine or ale instead, even weak beer for children, because fermented beverages are thought to be safer. You're not sure if that's true, but you don't have money for wine anyway. You pour water into a wooden cup and bring it to Elizabeth. She drinks slowly, wincing with each swallow, and you can see the fever is getting worse. Her skin is flushed, her eyes slightly glassy, and she's beginning to shiver despite the heat radiating from her body. Outside, the sounds of the morning continue. Someone is shouting about bread for sale, though the prices have tripled since the plague began. The baker's family died 2 weeks ago, and his apprentice has taken over, but supplies are inconsistent. Farmers are afraid to bring food into town, and those who do charge exorbitant prices. You have a little money saved, silver pennies hidden under a loose floorboard, but it won't last long at current prices. And what's the point of saving money if you're going to die anyway? The church bell rings, calling people to morning mass, though attendance has dropped dramatically. Some people still go, believing prayer is their only hope. Others have lost faith entirely, questioning how a merciful God could allow such suffering. The priest, Father Benedict, one of the few clergy who hasn't fled, tries to maintain normal services, but it's difficult to preach hope when you're conducting 5, 10, 15 funerals a day. The churchyard is full, forcing the digging of plague pits, mass graves outside town where bodies are dumped with minimal ceremony. The traditional funeral rites, the prayers, the proper burial, these have been abandoned by necessity. There are simply too many dead. You feel the fever starting in yourself now. It's subtle at first, just a slight warmth, an increasing fatigue, but you recognize it. The plague is taking hold. Your body is beginning its battle, one it will almost certainly lose. The bacterial infection is spreading through your lymphatic system, your bloodstream, multiplying exponentially. Without antibiotics, which won't exist for another 600 years, your immune system is facing an enemy it cannot defeat. Some people's bodies manage to fight off the infection, but most don't. You'll likely be dead within 3 days. Agnes brings you your shoes, simple leather pieces tied with cord, and helps you put them on. Your hands are shaking slightly, whether from fever or fear you're not sure. The morning routine continues because what else can you do? You can't stop living just because you're dying. You need to find food for Agnes, need to check if there's any work available, need to make arrangements for your daughter's future when you and Elizabeth are gone. These practical matters crowd out the existential terror, at least temporarily. The smell from outside is worsening as the sun rises and the day warms up. Plague brings with it the stench of death, of bodies decomposing, of disease and fear and unwashed humanity. People have stopped cleaning the streets, stopped maintaining basic sanitation, because those jobs were done by people who are now dead. The combination of corpses, human waste, garbage, and the general filth of medieval urban life creates an overwhelming assault on the senses. Some people wear cloths soaked in vinegar over their faces, believing it filters out the bad air. It doesn't, but it does make the smell slightly more bearable. This is your reality now. Waking up each morning wondering if this is the day you'll develop symptoms, if this is the day your family will be destroyed completely. The Black Death has turned everyday life into a nightmare of fear, paranoia, and grief, and there's no end in sight. You need to go outside. Despite the fever starting to take hold, despite knowing you're infected, you need to venture into the plague-ridden streets to find food for Agnes. Elizabeth is too sick to move from the bed, and your daughter is too young to navigate the dangerous, chaotic streets alone. So you pull on your threadbare cloak, wrap a cloth around your face partly for protection and partly to hide your identity. Because if people know you're infected, they'll drive you away and step out into what was once a normal medieval town, but has now become something out of a nightmare. The street is narrow, like all medieval streets, barely wide enough for a cart to pass, and it's littered with refuse. But not the normal refuse of everyday life. There are piles of clothes, bedding, personal belongings, all burned or burning in small fires along the street. These are the possessions of the dead, destroyed because people believe the plague clings to objects, that it can be transmitted through touch. They're not entirely wrong. The fleas carrying the bacteria do live in fabric, in bedding, though the medieval understanding of why burning helps is completely mistaken. You see your neighbor, John the Tanner, sitting outside his door, and he looks up as you pass. His eyes are hollow, sunken in, and his face is gaunt. "My wife died last night," he says flatly, without emotion. You nod, offering condolences that sound hollow even to your own ears. What can you say? "I'm sorry for your loss" means nothing when everyone is losing everything. John continues, "I tried to get the death cart to come, but they said it would be tomorrow. Tomorrow." "She's lying in there, starting to." He trails off, but you know what he means. Bodies decompose quickly, especially in summer heat, and the smell becomes unbearable. Some people simply drag their dead into the street and leave them there, unable to bear having a rotting corpse in their home. You keep walking, past houses marked with red crosses painted on the doors. "Lord have mercy on us" is written above some of them. These are plague houses where infected people are supposed to stay isolated, though enforcement is sporadic at best. Some towns have watchmen to ensure no one leaves quarantined houses, but your town doesn't have enough healthy men for such duty. Besides, people need food, need water, and they'll risk spreading infection rather than starve. You pass one marked house where you can hear someone crying inside, a woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate. You hurry past, not wanting to know, not wanting to get involved. The death cart is still making its rounds, and you see it ahead. The cart driver is a man named William, one of the few willing to take the job despite the obvious risks. He's wrapped in cloths soaked in vinegar, his face covered, his hands gloved. He's paid well for this work, though what good is money when there's nothing to buy and nowhere to spend it? 2 bodies are already on the cart, wrapped in sheets, and a third is being loaded as you watch. It's old Margaret from the baker's shop, and you recognize her gray hair, though her face is covered. She must have been 70, ancient by medieval standards, and she survived so much in her life only to be taken by this. William sees you watching and calls out, "You healthy?" It's both a greeting and a threat. If you're sick, he needs to know, needs to collect you, or at least mark your house. You nod, lying through the cloth covering your face. "Healthy enough." you say, which is technically true. You can still walk, still function. The bubo in your groin is painful but small enough to hide. William nods and continues his work. He doesn't have time to interrogate everyone. His cart will be full by midday, and he'll make multiple trips to the plague pits outside town. You've been to the plague pits once, and the memory haunts you. Massive trenches dug into the earth, filled with bodies in various states of decay. Some wrapped in sheets if their families could afford it, most just naked or in their death clothes. The bodies are layered with quicklime to speed decomposition and reduce smell, then covered with earth, but the pits never stay covered for long. More bodies arrive daily, hourly, and the diggers barely keep up. The smell is indescribable, and the sight of all those bodies, men, women, children, babies, all jumbled together in death, is something you'll never forget. The market square is ahead, and it's eerily quiet compared to normal times. Before the plague, this square would be packed with vendors, shoppers, animals, children playing. Now there are maybe a dozen stalls, half of what there used to be, and the vendors eye everyone suspiciously. No one wants to get too close. No one wants to handle money that might be contaminated. Some merchants have started using long poles to exchange goods, holding items at arm's length while customers drop coins into vinegar-filled bowls for cleaning. You approach a bread seller, a young woman you don't recognize. She must be new, taking over someone else's business. 2 loaves, you say, pulling out a coin. She looks at you carefully, checking for signs of illness, and you're grateful for the cloth covering your face. 3 pence, she says, and you nearly choke. Bread used to cost a penny per loaf. 3, you protest, but she shrugs. Flour's scarce, farmers won't come to town, and when they do, they charge double. You want bread or not? You pay, handing over 3 precious coins, and she tosses the bread toward you rather than handing it over. You catch the loaves, still warm, and tuck them under your cloak. This bread will feed Agnes for 2 days, maybe 3 if she's careful. You need more food, vegetables if you can find them, maybe some salted fish, but your money is running low, and you're not sure how much longer you'll be alive to provide for her. As you're leaving the market, you see a procession approaching. It's the Flagellants, a group of about 20 men, all stripped to the waist despite the morning chill. Their backs are a mess of wounds, old scars layered with fresh cuts, blood streaming down their skin as they whip themselves rhythmically. They're chanting in Latin prayers and psalms, begging God to end the plague, offering their suffering in exchange for mercy. Some people stop to watch, some join in the prayers. Others hurry away, disturbed by the display. The Flagellants believe that humanity's sins have caused God to unleash this plague, and only through extreme penance can divine mercy be earned. They travel from town to town, performing their public scourging, gathering followers, and sometimes causing trouble. Some have attacked Jews, claiming they're responsible for the plague, part of some conspiracy. The violence has been terrible in some places. Entire communities massacred by mobs whipped into frenzy by Flagellants and other preachers of hate. You try to avoid the procession, but their leader, a wild-eyed man with a long beard, spots you and calls out, "Brother, join us in atonement. Beg God's forgiveness for your sins." You shake your head and keep walking, but his words echo in your mind. Are you being punished for sins? Is this plague your fault somehow? The church preaches that interpretation, that the Black Death is divine judgment, but it makes no sense. Why would God kill innocent children? What sins could baby Margaret have committed to deserve death at 6 months old? The theological justifications ring hollow when faced with the reality of mass death. You pass a church, and through the open door, you can hear Father Benedict leading prayers. The church is full, people kneeling, crying, begging for deliverance. Some have brought offerings, what little they have, candles, coins, food, laying them on the altar as if bribing God might change his mind. You think about going in, adding your prayers to theirs, but what's the point? You've prayed every day since the plague arrived. Your prayers didn't save Thomas. They didn't save Margaret. They won't save Elizabeth, and they probably won't save you. A commotion erupts down a side street, and you hear shouting. Against your better judgment, you move closer to see what's happening. A crowd has gathered around a house, and they're dragging someone out, a man you recognize as Aaron the moneylender, one of the few Jews left in town. Most fled weeks ago when the accusations and violence started, but Aaron stayed, hoping to protect his property. Now the mob is accusing him of poisoning the well, of spreading plague deliberately. "He's a Christ killer," someone shouts. "He's murdered our children," Aaron is pleading, swearing his innocence, but the mob isn't listening. They're looking for someone to blame, someone to punish, and Aaron is convenient. You should intervene, should say something, but you're sick, feverish, and weak, and getting involved would mean exposing yourself to the mob's rage. So you stand there, frozen as they beat Aaron, drag him toward the town square. You don't stay to see what happens next, but you hear later that they burned him in his own house. The authorities did nothing. They're too overwhelmed, too desperate themselves to enforce law and order. The social fabric that held this town together has completely unraveled. People who were neighbors, friends, family are now suspicious of each other, quick to accuse, quick to violence. Trust has evaporated. Everyone is a potential carrier of death, and fear has replaced compassion. You've heard stories of parents abandoning plague-stricken children, of children fleeing from sick parents, of spouses leaving each other to die alone. The plague has revealed something dark in human nature, or perhaps it's simply shown how thin the veneer of civilization really is. You make your way back home, clutching the bread, avoiding eye contact with anyone you pass. The fever is worse now, unmistakable, and your joints are starting to ache. The bubo in your groin has grown, now the size of a plum, and each step sends waves of pain through your body. You're not going to survive this. You know that now. The question is how long you have and whether you can make arrangements for Agnes before you die. Elizabeth is worse when you return. She's barely conscious, muttering incoherently, her body racked with chills despite the fever burning through her. The bubo under her arm has turned black-purple, a grotesque swelling the size of an apple. Agnes is sitting next to her, holding her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Papa," she says when she sees you. "Mama won't wake up properly. She keeps talking about Thomas and Margaret like they're here." Delirium is one of the plague's symptoms, the fever cooking the brain, causing hallucinations and confusion. Some plague victims believe they're in heaven or hell, seeing angels or demons. Others relive memories, talking to people long dead. Elizabeth is seeing your dead children, which might be a mercy in its own way. At least she's not entirely aware of her suffering. You give Agnes one of the loaves and sit down heavily on the bed. Your body is failing rapidly now, the infection's spreading, and you're not sure how much time you have left. Hours, a day. You need to think about Agnes's future. Need to find someone who will take her in, but who? Everyone is dealing with their own tragedies, their own losses. Who would want another mouth to feed, especially the child of plague victims? Outside, the death cart passes again, its wheels creaking, the driver calling for more bodies. It's a sound that will haunt survivors for the rest of their lives, a sound that has become the soundtrack to the end of the world. Because that's what this feels like. Not just a plague, but an apocalypse, the collapse of everything familiar, everything safe. The medieval world, for all its hardships, had order, structure, predictability. The plague has destroyed all of that, leaving chaos, terror, and death in its wake. This is what survival looks like during the plague. It's not heroic or noble. It's desperate, cruel, and often futile. You're not surviving so much as you're dying slowly, watching everyone around you die, and hoping somehow to spare one 7-year-old girl from the same fate. You're sitting on the edge of the bed, watching Elizabeth's shallow breathing, feeling your own fever intensify when there's a knock at the door. It's tentative, cautious, the knock of someone who doesn't want to get too close. You struggle to your feet, the pain in your groin making you wince, and open the door slightly. Standing there is Father Benedict, the town priest, and behind him is a figure that makes your blood run cold, a plague doctor. The doctor is wearing the distinctive costume you've heard about but never seen up close. The long, beaked mask makes him look like some kind of giant bird, the glass eye pieces giving him an insect-like appearance. The beak is stuffed with aromatic substances. You can smell them from here. Cloves, herbs, camphor, intended to filter the bad air that supposedly carries plague. He's wearing a long, waxed coat that reaches his ankles, gloves that extend past his elbows, and he carries a long wooden cane that he uses to examine patients without touching them directly. "I heard your wife is sick," Father Benedict says gently. He's been a good priest, one of the few who didn't flee when the plague arrived, visiting the sick, administering last rites, conducting funerals until his voice is hoarse. He looks exhausted, aged by months of witnessing suffering. "Dr. Blackwood has agreed to examine her." Dr. Blackwood. You've heard the name. He's not from your town originally, but traveled here when the plague began. One of those physicians who go where the money is, who charge exorbitant fees to desperate families. You start to protest that you can't afford a physician, but Father Benedict holds up his hand. "The church is paying. We cannot let people die without attempting to save them." You let them in, though every instinct screams to keep them out, to protect the little privacy and dignity your family has left. Dr. Blackwood enters, his masked head swiveling as he surveys the room. He points his cane at Elizabeth, who's barely conscious, and speaks, his voice muffled and strange through the mask. "How long has she been sick?" 2 days, you say. "It started with fever, then the swelling appeared." Dr. Blackwood approaches the bed, using his cane to lift the blanket, examining Elizabeth without touching her. You can see the bubo under her arm clearly now, massive and dark, stretching the skin until it looks like it might burst. The doctor nods, the beak of his mask bobbing. Classic presentation of the pestilence. The humors are severely imbalanced. The black bile has become dominant, corrupting the blood and manifesting in these swellings. He's explaining plague using the medieval medical theory that's been dominant since ancient Greece. According to this understanding, the human body contains 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is a perfect balance of these 4 substances. Disease occurs when one humor becomes excessive. The plague, they believe, is caused by an excess of black bile, corrupted by bad air, planetary misalignment, or divine punishment. It's completely wrong, but it's the only framework medieval physicians have for understanding disease. "What can you do?" you ask, though you're not sure you want to know the answer. Dr. Blackwood straightens, his bird-like mask turning toward you. "There are several treatments. First, we must rebalance the humors through bloodletting. Removing the corrupted blood will allow the body to produce fresh, healthy blood. Second, we can lance the bubo to drain the poisonous matter directly. Third, we'll apply poultices to draw out the remaining corruption." Bloodletting. The universal medieval cure for everything, and one that probably kills more people than it helps. The theory is sound according to their understanding. If disease is caused by corrupted blood, Remove the bad blood and the patient will improve. In practice, bleeding an already sick person, someone whose body is fighting a massive infection, only weakens them further and hastens death. But you don't know this. All you know is that the church's physician, an educated man who studied in universities, says this will help. Dr. Blackwood opens his bag and you see his instruments. There's a lancet, a small sharp blade for opening veins, a brass bleeding bowl to catch the blood, various knives and tools for lancing buboes, jars of leeches, because sometimes venesection with a blade isn't enough, and the leeches are used to draw blood from specific areas. The sight of these implements fills you with dread, but what choice do you have? We'll begin with bloodletting, Dr. Blackwood says, rolling up Elizabeth's sleeve to expose her arm. She stirs slightly, moaning, but doesn't fully wake. He finds a vein in her inner elbow, holds the brass bowl beneath it, and makes a swift cut with the lancet. Dark red blood begins to flow into the bowl, and he lets it continue for what seems like forever, but is probably only a few minutes. Elizabeth becomes even paler, if that's possible, her already feverish face taking on a grayish tint. After collecting what he considers enough blood, maybe a pint or more, he bandages her arm and moves to the bubo. This is the critical step, he explains. The bubo contains the concentrated poison of the plague. By lancing it and draining it, we remove the source of infection. He's accidentally half right. The bubo does contain bacteria, millions of them, but draining it doesn't remove the infection. It just relieves pressure, and sometimes allows the body's immune system to better fight the bacteria in that specific location. He places the point of his knife against the swollen, blackened skin of the bubo, and Elizabeth screams, suddenly awake as he pushes the blade in. The bubo ruptures, and a flood of pus and blood pours out, thick, dark, and reeking of rot. The smell is overwhelming, making you gag. Agnes cries out and runs to the corner, hiding her face. Dr. Blackwood uses his cane to press on the area around the bubo, forcing out more of the infected matter, and Elizabeth writhes in agony, too weak to fight him off. Good, he says, as if he's not just caused someone excruciating pain. The poison is draining. Now we apply the poultice. From his bag, he produces a cloth packet containing a mixture of herbs, animal fat, and other substances. He spreads this paste over the lanced bubo, covering it with a bandage. This contains thuriac, the universal antidote, along with crushed figs, onions, and butter. It will draw out any remaining poison and promote healing. Thuriac is a legendary medieval cure-all, supposedly created by ancient physicians and containing dozens of ingredients, including viper flesh, opium, and various spices. It's expensive, supposedly effective against all poisons, and actually does nothing for plague. But medieval people believe in it with the same faith they believe in religious relics or the power of prayer. Dr. Blackwood turns to you now, and you realize he knows you're sick too. Perhaps he noticed you favoring your right leg, avoiding pressure on the bubo in your groin. Or perhaps he simply assumes that if your wife is infected, you probably are too. You're showing symptoms as well, aren't you? There's no point in lying. You nod slowly. A swelling in my groin and fever. Show me, he commands, and you reluctantly lift your tunic. The bubo is clearly visible now, swollen and dark, though not as large as Elizabeth's yet. Dr. Blackwood examines it with his cane, prodding it, making you wince. Early stage. We should treat it now before it worsens. The same procedure, bloodletting and lancing. The thought of undergoing what you just watched Elizabeth endure fills you with horror. But again, what choice do you have? At least if you're treated, if you try something, maybe there's a chance, however small, that you'll survive long enough to care for Agnes. You sit on the edge of the bed and extend your arm for the bloodletting. The lancet is cold and sharp, and you watch your own blood flow into the brass bowl, dark and steady. You start to feel light-headed as the bowl fills. Dr. Blackwood is taking more from you than he did from Elizabeth, perhaps because you're larger, or because he believes your case is less advanced and you can spare more blood. When he finally bandages your arm, you feel weak, dizzy, your head swimming. "Now the bubo," he says, and you brace yourself. The knife enters the swollen flesh, and the pain is unlike anything you've ever experienced. It's not just the cutting. It's the pressure of the infection being released, the nerve endings in the swollen tissue all screaming at once. You bite down on a leather strap Dr. Blackwood offers, trying not to scream, trying to be strong for Agnes, who's watching from the corner, tears streaming down her face. The pus drains out, thick and foul, and Dr. Blackwood presses on the surrounding area, forcing out more, unconcerned with your pain. When he's satisfied that he's drained as much as possible, he applies the same poultice he used on Elizabeth, binding it in place with strips of cloth. "Keep these dressings clean. Change them twice daily. Continue drinking water with vinegar mixed in. It helps purify the body from within. And pray. Prayer is often our most powerful medicine." There it is, the admission that for all his tools and theories, medieval medicine is ultimately helpless against the plague. Prayer is the real treatment, the only thing left when the bloodletting and lancing and poultices fail, as they almost always do. Dr. Blackwood is a physician, trained in universities, familiar with the texts of Galen and Hippocrates, but against the Black Death, he might as well be a witch doctor shaking bones and chanting spells. Father Benedict has been watching silently, and now he steps forward. "I will pray with you," he says, "and I will return tomorrow to check on you all. Have faith. God is merciful even in these dark times." Is he, though? You want to ask this, but don't. Father Benedict is a good man doing his best, and challenging his faith would be cruel. Besides, maybe he's right. Maybe God is merciful, just in ways you don't understand. Maybe there's some divine plan behind all this suffering that will only make sense later, in heaven, after you're dead. It's cold comfort, but it's the only comfort available. After they leave, you and Elizabeth lie side by side in the bed, both of you bleeding, feverish, in pain. The treatments have not made you feel better. If anything, you feel worse, weaker from blood loss, the lanced buboes throbbing with fresh agony. Agnes curls up between you, sobbing quietly, and you put your arm around her, trying to provide some comfort even though you know you're failing. The smell of the poultices mixes with the smell of disease and unwashed bodies and fear. It's a smell you're becoming numb to, the smell of plague, the smell of death approaching. Outside, the sounds of the dying town continue. Someone is wailing, a high-pitched keen that goes on and on. The death cart passes again, its wheels creaking their familiar song. Church bells ring for another funeral, and then stop entirely because there's no point in ringing them continuously. Medieval medicine has tried its best, and its best is woefully inadequate. The physicians don't understand that plague is caused by bacteria spread by fleas from infected rats. They don't know about infection, about immune systems, about antibiotics that won't be discovered for 600 years. They're operating with incomplete information, bad theories, and tools that do more harm than good. But they're trying, and in a world with no other options, their trying is all anyone has. You drift into a feverish sleep, your mind wandering through strange landscapes. You dream of Thomas and Margaret, your dead children, standing in a meadow full of flowers. They're calling to you, beckoning you to join them, and part of you wants to go, wants to surrender to the fever and be reunited with them. But Agnes is there too, in your dream, pulling you back, needing you. And you wake with a start, confused about what's real and what's fever-induced hallucination. The afternoon sun is slanting through the window, and you realize hours have passed. Elizabeth is still breathing, barely, her breath shallow and labored. Agnes has fallen asleep, exhausted from fear and crying. And you're still alive, still conscious, though whether that's a blessing or a curse, you're no longer sure. When you wake again, it's nearly evening, and your stomach is cramping with hunger. You haven't eaten all day, too consumed by fever and fear to think about food, but now your body is demanding sustenance even as it's fighting off infection. Agnes is awake too, sitting quietly by the window, and you can hear her stomach growling from across the room. The bread you bought this morning is still sitting on the table, and you gesture for her to eat some. She tears off a piece and brings the rest to you. The bread is hard now, already staling in the dry air, but it's food, and you chew it slowly, trying to get some nutrition into your failing body. It tastes like sawdust mixed with despair, but you force it down anyway. Elizabeth hasn't eaten in 2 days, and you try to get her to take some water at least, but she's barely conscious, her body so consumed by fever that basic functions like swallowing have become difficult. Food has become one of the most pressing concerns in plague-stricken towns, sometimes even more immediate than the disease itself. The economic system that kept medieval society functioning has completely collapsed. Farmers who used to bring produce, grain, and livestock to town markets are staying away, terrified of infection. Those who do come charge prices that are 3, 4, 5 times higher than normal, knowing that desperate townspeople will pay anything for food. The law of supply and demand is operating in its cruelest form: massive demand, vanishing supply, and prices that most people simply cannot afford. The disruption starts at the most basic level. Agricultural workers, the serfs and laborers who plant, tend, and harvest crops, are dying in huge numbers. In some villages, half or more of the working-age population is gone. Fields that should be full of workers are empty. Wheat and barley rot in the fields unharvested because there's no one left to bring in the crop, or those who remain are too afraid to work in groups where plague might spread. Entire villages have been abandoned, the few survivors fleeing to relatives elsewhere or simply wandering, hoping to find somewhere the plague hasn't reached, though such places are increasingly rare. Livestock are another problem. Cows need milking, sheep need tending, pigs need feeding, and chickens need care. When the people who do these tasks die, the animals suffer. You've heard stories of dairy cows dying from infected udders that were never milked, of sheep wandering loose without shepherds, of entire herds of pigs starving because their keeper is dead, and no one has claimed them. Some animals have gone feral, roaming the countryside, and there are reports of livestock wandering into towns, adding to the chaos. The towns themselves are facing food crises. Bakers are dying, and those who survive often can't get flour because the mills are closed, the millers dead or fled. The butchers can't get meat because there's no one to slaughter animals or transport them to market. Fishermen, traditionally a steady source of protein, are afraid to sell their catch in town, preferring to smoke or salt it and store it for their own families rather than risk exposure to plague. The result is that markets that used to be full of food vendors are now nearly empty, and what little is available costs a fortune. You think about your own food situation. You have the remaining bread from this morning, maybe enough for another day if you ration it carefully. There's a small sack of dried peas in the corner, maybe a pound left. A bit of salt pork that's probably turned by now, but beggars can't be choosers. Some onions starting to sprout, This is all the food in your house, and it will feed 2 people. You're not counting Elizabeth because she's beyond eating for perhaps 3 more days. Then what? Your savings, those silver pennies hidden under the floorboard, would normally be enough to buy a week's worth of food. Now they might stretch to 3 days if you're lucky and can find anyone selling. And there's the deeper problem: even if you had more money, there's simply not enough food available. You can't buy what doesn't exist. The medieval just-in-time economy, where food was produced locally and consumed quickly with minimal storage, has no resilience against a shock like the plague. When the production and distribution systems collapse, starvation follows quickly. Some people have turned to desperate measures. You've heard rumors of theft, of people breaking into abandoned houses to steal whatever food remains, of violence over a loaf of bread, of fights breaking out at market stalls. The normal social constraints that prevent such behavior have dissolved in the face of starvation and fear. When your children are hungry, when you're watching them slowly waste away, moral considerations become less important than survival. There are also darker rumors, whispers that some people have resorted to eating things they wouldn't normally consider food. Dogs and cats have disappeared from the streets, presumably into cooking pots. Someone claimed they saw people digging up bulbs and roots, eating grass like cattle, boiling leather shoes to make a kind of broth. And there are even more disturbing stories, ones you don't want to believe, about cannibalism in the most desperate areas. Whether these stories are true or just plague-induced hysteria, you're not sure, but they speak to the level of desperation people have reached. The wealthy are doing slightly better, but only slightly. They have stores of grain, salted meat, preserved fruits, wine, things that can be stored long-term. But even they are rationing, uncertain how long the plague will last or when normal commerce will resume, and their wealth makes them targets. There have been instances of mobs breaking into wealthy houses, not to steal gold or jewels, but to take food. The normal respect for property and social hierarchy has eroded. When you're starving, when your family is dying, the law seems less important than a sack of flour. The church has tried to help, organizing food distributions for the poor, but the church's resources are also strained. Many monasteries and convents, which normally maintain significant food stores and distribute charity, have been hit hard by plague. Monks and nuns, living in close quarters, have died in large numbers. Some religious houses have been completely wiped out, the buildings standing empty, food rotting in their storehouses because there's no one left alive to distribute it. You look at Agnes, at her thin face and hollow eyes, and guilt overwhelms you. She's 7 years old and she's starving, not just because of the plague directly, but because the plague has destroyed the economic structures that normally provide food. You're a carpenter, or were, and you used to trade your labor for goods or money to buy food. But now there's no work because no one is building anything. Everyone is just trying to survive, and your skills are worthless. The money you have is devaluing because there's nothing to buy. The social contract that said if you worked hard, you could feed your family has been broken. Elizabeth stirs and opens her eyes, focusing on you with some difficulty. "The children," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "Are they eating?" She's confused, delirious, thinking Thomas and Margaret are still alive. You don't correct her. Let her have this illusion if it brings comfort. "Yes," you lie. "They're eating. They're fine." She smiles weakly and closes her eyes again, settling back into fevered sleep. You decide you need to venture out again, despite your fever, despite the pain, to see if there's any food available anywhere. You leave Agnes with instructions to bolt the door and not open it for anyone except you, and you step back out into the plague streets as the sun is setting. Evening is coming, and with it, the increased danger of crime and violence that darkness brings. The market square is empty now, the vendors having packed up and left. You see a few people scavenging, looking for dropped or discarded food, anything edible. You recognize one of them, Master Richard's wife, a woman who used to be well-dressed and proud, now down on her hands and knees searching through garbage for scraps. The plague has equalized society in the cruelest way possible. You head toward the church, where Father Benedict sometimes has food to distribute. There's a line outside, maybe 20 people, all looking gaunt and desperate. You join the line, and slowly, painfully, it moves forward. When you reach the front, Father Benedict sees you and his face falls. He knows you're sick, can probably tell just by looking at you, but he doesn't send you away. He hands you a small bundle, a piece of cheese, hard and dry but edible, and some dried fish. "This is all I have left," he says quietly. "The monastery's stores are nearly exhausted. I don't know what we'll do next week." You thank him and turn to leave, but he calls you back. "Your daughter," he says. After, I will see that she's cared for. I promise you that. She won't be abandoned." It's a small comfort, knowing that Agnes will have someone looking out for her, but it's also an acknowledgement of what you both know is coming. You and Elizabeth will die, probably soon, and Agnes will be an orphan. Father Benedict is promising to prevent her from starving or being left completely alone, and it's the best you can hope for. You make your way home slowly, your body protesting every step. The fever is worse. The bubo in your groin is throbbing, and you're starting to understand why some plague victims simply lie down and wait for death. Fighting it is exhausting. Every moment is a struggle, and for what? To buy a few more hours or days of suffering. But then you think of Agnes, and you force yourself to keep moving. Back in your room, you give Agnes the cheese and fish. She eats slowly, savoring each bite, and you eat nothing, telling her you're not hungry, though in truth you're ravenous. But she needs the food more than you do. You're dying anyway. Better to let your last food go to someone who might survive. As night falls, you lie down next to Elizabeth, listening to her labored breathing, feeling your own body burning with fever. Your mind drifts to memories of better times, before the plague, when food was plentiful and cheap, when the biggest concern was whether you'd have enough work to pay rent, not whether you'd live to see tomorrow. Those days seem like a lifetime ago, though it's only been months. The economic collapse caused by the plague will have long-term effects that no one can foresee yet. The massive death toll will actually lead to labor shortages, giving surviving peasants more bargaining power, beginning the slow end of serfdom. But that's decades in the future. Right now, in this moment, the only economic reality is scarcity, starvation, and the breakdown of every system that made medieval life possible. Your stomach growls again, hollow and empty, but you ignore it. Food is just one more thing the plague has taken from you, along with your health, your children, your wife, your livelihood, your dignity, and soon your life. You close your eyes and try to sleep, knowing that tomorrow, if you wake at all, will bring more of the same hunger, fear, pain, and the slow, inexorable approach of death. You wake in the deep of night to the sound of chanting. At first, you think it's a fever dream, another hallucination brought on by the infection coursing through your body. But no, the sound is real, coming from the street outside. You struggle to the window and look out, and what you see is something out of a nightmare. A procession of perhaps 40 men is moving slowly down the street, all of them stripped to the waist despite the cold night air. They're arranged in 2 lines, and they're whipping themselves, scourges whistling through the air and landing on bare backs with sickening thuds. The men are chanting in unison, a Latin hymn you recognize but can't quite place, their voices rising and falling in rhythm with the whips. Blood streams down their backs, black in the moonlight, and some of the men are weeping, crying out in pain or religious ecstasy. It's hard to tell which. The flagellants have arrived in your town. You've heard of them. Everyone has. These bands of penitents who travel from place to place, performing public acts of penance to atone for humanity's sins and hopefully convince God to lift the plague. They believe that the Black Death is divine punishment, God's wrath unleashed on a sinful world, and only through extreme suffering can they earn forgiveness and mercy. Their leader walks at the front, a tall man with wild eyes and a beard that reaches his chest. He's not whipping himself yet, saving his strength to lead the ritual. Behind him, the two lines of flagellants march in sync, 3 strikes to their own backs, then a step forward, then 3 more strikes. The rhythm is hypnotic, terrible, and as they pass under your window, you can see the damage they've done to themselves. Their backs are masses of wounds, old scars layered over new cuts, some still bleeding, some scabbed over, some clearly infected. They've been doing this for weeks, maybe months, traveling from town to town, gathering followers, leaving blood and fervor in their wake. The procession stops in the town square, and the leader raises his arms. The chanting stops, the whipping pauses, and his voice rings out in the night. Brothers and sisters, behold the wrath of God. Our sins have brought this pestilence upon us. The fornication, the greed, the usury, the pride. God has seen our wickedness, and he is punishing us justly. People are emerging from houses, drawn by the commotion, and a crowd gathers. Some are curious, some are believers, some are just desperate for anything that might offer hope. The leader continues, his voice passionate, almost manic. But God is also merciful. He will forgive us if we show true contrition, if we suffer as Christ suffered, if we bleed as he bled on the cross. Join us, brothers, take up the scourge. Atone for your sins and save your souls. Several people from the crowd step forward, men mostly, and the flagellants welcome them, offering spare whips. The ritual begins again, this time with the new recruits joining in, and the sound of whips striking flesh fills the square. Some of the new participants cry out in pain immediately, unused to the agony. Others grit their teeth and continue, determined to prove their devotion, to do something, anything, that might end the plague. Agnes has joined you at the window, and she's staring at the scene below with wide, frightened eyes. "Why are they hurting themselves, Papa?" she asks, and you struggle to find an answer. How do you explain religious flagellation to a 7-year-old? How do you explain that adults, grown men, have become so desperate, so convinced of their own sinfulness, that they believe beating themselves bloody will change God's mind about the plague? They think it will make God stop the sickness, you say finally, knowing it's inadequate but not knowing what else to say. Agnes considers this, then asks, "Will it work?" And you have no answer. Part of you wants to say no, that it's madness, that hurting yourself won't cure disease. But another part, the part that's feverish and desperate and watching your wife die, wonders if maybe they're right. Maybe this is what God wants. Maybe suffering is the price for survival. The flagellant ritual continues for what feels like hours. They whip themselves until they're too exhausted to continue. Then they collapse on the ground, praying, crying out for forgiveness. Some people in the crowd are weeping, caught up in the religious fervor. Others are joining in the prayers, kneeling in the street, begging God for mercy. And a few, like you, are watching with a mixture of horror and fascination, wondering if this mass display of suffering will accomplish anything. Father Benedict arrives, looking distressed. The church officially disapproves of the flagellants. Several popes have condemned the movement, calling it heretical, accusing the flagellants of usurping the church's authority and promoting false doctrines. But local clergy often don't know what to do. The flagellants are popular. They give people a sense of agency, a feeling that they can do something to fight the plague. Trying to stop them might cause a riot, especially in a town this desperate. The flagellant leader sees Father Benedict and approaches him. "Father, will you not join us in our penance? Will you not show your flock the way to salvation?" There's a challenge in his voice, an accusation that the church has failed, that traditional prayers and masses haven't stopped the plague, so more extreme measures are necessary. Father Benedict stands his ground, though he looks deeply uncomfortable. The church teaches that salvation comes through faith in Christ, through the sacraments, through living a good Christian life. Not through this, he gestures at the blood-soaked flagellants. Suffering for its own sake doesn't please God. Christ's sacrifice was sufficient. We don't need to repeat it. The flagellant leader laughs, a harsh sound. Sufficient? Then why is God still killing us? Why are children dying? Why are the innocent suffering alongside the guilty? Your prayers aren't working, Father. Your masses aren't working. We need stronger medicine, and pain is that medicine. It's a compelling argument, especially to people who are watching their families die despite all their prayers. Traditional religion promises that God will answer prayers, that faith will be rewarded, but the plague has challenged those promises. People have prayed constantly, attended Mass daily, made offerings, done everything the church asked, and they're still dying. The flagellants offer an alternative. If God hasn't answered your prayers, maybe you haven't suffered enough. Maybe you need to prove your sincerity through blood. The confrontation between Father Benedict and the flagellant leader ends without resolution. The priest returns to his church, and the flagellants continue their ritual. As dawn approaches, they finally stop, wrapping themselves in rough robes, their backs still seeping blood. Some of them will die from infections in their wounds, adding plague deaths to injuries from self-flagellation, but they believe it's worth it. They believe they're saving souls, including their own. You turn away from the window, exhausted by the spectacle, and return to Elizabeth's bedside. She's still alive, barely, her breathing shallow and irregular. You check the bandage on your own bubo, and it's soaked through with blood and pus. You should change it, like Dr. Blackwood instructed, but you're too tired, too feverish, too defeated. You lie down next to your dying wife and close your eyes, the sound of the flagellants chanting still echoing in your head. Religion is supposed to provide comfort in times of crisis, supposed to offer hope and meaning in the face of suffering. But the plague has twisted religion into something darker. The flagellants represent one extreme, believing that salvation requires blood and pain. Others have gone the opposite direction, losing faith entirely, questioning how a loving God could allow such suffering. You've heard people saying openly heretical things, denying God's goodness or even his existence. Such statements would normally result in prosecution for heresy, but the church is too overwhelmed to pursue every instance of doubt and despair. And then there are the scapegoating movements, using religion to justify violence. You think of Aaron, the Jewish moneylender who was murdered by a mob. The accusations against Jews, that they're spreading plague deliberately, are based partly on religious hatred and partly on desperate need to blame someone. If the plague is punishment from God, but Christians are suffering, then maybe the real sinners are the non-Christians. Maybe the Jews who reject Christ are the ones God is really angry at, and eliminating them will end the plague. It's insane logic, but terrified people aren't logical. Throughout Europe, Jewish communities are being massacred. Entire populations of Jewish quarters are burned alive, accused of witchcraft, of poisoning wells, of serving the devil. The Pope has issued statements defending Jews, pointing out that they're dying from plague too, so they clearly aren't immune or responsible. But the pogroms continue anyway, driven by rage, fear, and the medieval Christian tradition of anti-Semitism that blamed Jews for everything from bad harvests to military defeats. There are also the folk beliefs, the superstitions that exist alongside official church doctrine. People are wearing amulets, lucky charms, religious relics, anything that might protect them. Some believe that certain prayers said backwards will ward off plague. Others think that carrying bread blessed on specific feast days provides immunity. There are talismans inscribed with magic words, combinations of Latin and nonsense, sold by charlatans who prey on desperate people. None of it works, of course, but when science and medicine have no answers, superstition rushes in to fill the void. You yourself are wearing a small wooden cross that belonged to your mother, tucked under your tunic. You don't really believe it will protect you, not anymore, but you wear it anyway. Habit, tradition, the faint hope that maybe there's some power in these symbols even if you don't fully understand it. The boundary between faith and superstition has become blurred, and people grasp at anything that might offer even the illusion of control. As the sun rises and a new day begins, you hear the death cart again, its wheels creaking, the driver calling for bodies. The flagellants have moved on, leaving only bloodstains in the square as evidence they were ever there. Life, such as it is, continues. People emerge from their homes, those who are still healthy enough to do so, and try to face another day of plague and fear and uncertainty. Your fever is worse, and the bubo in your groin has grown to the size of a lemon, painful and hot to the touch. You know with growing certainty that you won't survive this. The question isn't if you'll die, but when, and whether you'll see Elizabeth go first or follow her shortly after. You hold Agnes close, trying to memorize the feel of her, the smell of her hair, the sound of her breathing. These are your last days with your daughter, and you want to make them mean something, want to leave her with some comfort or wisdom or assurance. But what can you say? That God loves her, that everything will be all right, that the plague will end and life will return to normal. All of these would be lies, so you say nothing. You just hold her and pray silently, not to God because you're not sure you believe anymore, but to whatever power might be listening, that Agnes will survive, that someone will care for her, that her life won't end in this plague-stricken nightmare. It's a small prayer, a desperate prayer, but it's all you have left. The day after the flagellants pass through, another kind of violence erupts in your town. You hear it before you see it. A roaring crowd, angry voices, the sound of breaking wood and shattering glass. You pull yourself to the window, dizzy with fever, and see a mob forming in the street, maybe 50 or 60 people, armed with clubs, axes, torches. They're heading toward the Jewish quarter, what little remains of it. Most of the Jewish families fled weeks ago when the accusations and threats started, but a few stayed, either because they had nowhere else to go or because they couldn't abandon their homes and businesses. The mob is shouting, and you can make out some of the accusations. Poison! They poison the wells! They're spreading the plague! God demands justice! It's the same rhetoric you've been hearing for weeks now, the scapegoating that's sweeping across Europe, the need to blame someone, anyone, for the inexplicable horror of the plague. If it can't be explained by bad air or planetary alignment, or divine punishment for general sin, then it must be a conspiracy. Someone must be doing this deliberately. And in medieval Christian society, the Jews are the eternal outsiders, the convenient targets for every grievance and fear. Father Benedict is trying to stop the mob, standing in their path, his arms spread. "This is madness," he shouts. "The Jews are dying too. They're not responsible for the plague. This is murder, not justice." but his voice is drowned out by the crowd's anger. Someone pushes him aside, not violently but firmly, and the mob continues toward the Jewish quarter. You see some town officials in the crowd, people who should be maintaining order, but they are either participating or standing aside, unwilling or unable to intervene. You want to do something, want to stand with Father Benedict, want to be the kind of person who opposes injustice even at personal risk. But you're dying. Your body is racked with plague and you can barely stand, let alone fight a mob. And there's Agnes to think about. If you go out there and get yourself killed trying to defend people the mob has decided are guilty, who will protect your daughter? So you watch from the window, ashamed of your cowardice but unable to overcome it, as the violence unfolds below. The mob reaches Samuel the cloth merchant's house, one of the last Jewish families in town. You know Samuel slightly, have bought fabric from him in the past. He's a quiet man, middle-aged, with a wife and 2 teenage sons. You've never had any problem with him, never believed the accusations that Jews are evil or dangerous. But the mob doesn't care about your opinion or Father Benedict's appeals to reason. They break down Samuel's door with axes, and you can hear screaming from inside. Samuel appears, dragged out by several men. He's trying to explain to defend himself. I'm not spreading plague. My own brother died from it. Please, we're innocent. His wife and sons are pulled out after him, and the mob is shouting questions, accusations. Did you poison the well? Confess. Did you perform witchcraft? Admit it. Samuel continues to protest his innocence, and that seems to enrage the mob further. They want confession, want validation for their beliefs, and his denial is seen as proof of his guilt. If he's lying, he must be guilty. If he admits guilt, he's guilty. There's no possible outcome where he's innocent. Someone in the crowd shouts, "Make them convert. If they accept Christ, God will spare them." This becomes a chant, and Samuel and his family are given an ultimatum: convert to Christianity immediately or die. It's forced conversion, explicitly condemned by church law, but the mob doesn't care about law or doctrine. Samuel looks at Father Benedict, who has followed the crowd and is now trying to intervene again. "Father, tell them." "Tell them this is wrong." Father Benedict does try. "You cannot force conversion. It must come from genuine faith, from the heart. This is a mortal sin." But he's ignored. The mob wants either conversion or blood, preferably both. Samuel is faced with an impossible choice: renounce his faith, his identity, everything that makes him who he is, or watch his family be murdered. He chooses his faith. "I am a Jew," he says clearly, "as my fathers were, as God commanded. I will not convert under threat. We are innocent of these accusations." The mob's response is immediate and brutal. They beat Samuel and his sons with clubs and fists. His wife is screaming, trying to protect them, and she's struck down too. You turn away from the window, unable to watch anymore, but you can still hear it. The sounds of violence, of people dying, of a mob committing murder in the name of God and public safety. After what seems like an eternity but is probably only a few minutes, the sounds stop, replaced by the crackle of fire. The mob is burning Samuel's house, destroying any evidence, any records, any presence that the family ever existed. Agnes is crying, asking what's happening, why those people are hurting the cloth merchant. You pull her away from the window, trying to shield her from the violence, but she's already seen too much. She's 7 years old and she's witnessed murder. How do you explain that to a child? How do you tell her that sometimes fear turns people into monsters, that sometimes crowds commit atrocities that individuals would never consider, that sometimes justice is whatever the angry majority decides it is? Later, after the mob has dispersed, after the fires have been put out, Father Benedict comes to your door. He looks devastated, aged 10 years in one day. 4 people dead, he says quietly. 4 innocent people murdered, and for what? The plague continues. Nothing has changed except that we've added sin to suffering. He sits heavily on your one chair, his head in his hands. I couldn't stop them. I tried, and they just pushed me aside like I was nothing. You offer what little comfort you can, though you're not sure he hears you through his grief and self-recrimination. The truth is, he couldn't have stopped them. One priest against an angry mob was never going to win. The violence against Jews during the plague is happening everywhere, across England, France, Germany, all through Europe. Entire communities are being wiped out. Some Jewish populations are surviving by converting, either genuinely or temporarily, planning to return to their faith once the danger passes. Others are fleeing to regions where authorities might protect them, though such places are rare. And many are simply being killed, thousands of them, in one of the darkest chapters of medieval history. The accusations are absurd, obviously so if you think about them rationally. Jews are dying from plague at the same rates as Christians. If they were spreading it deliberately, wouldn't they protect themselves? The supposed evidence of poisoned wells is either fabricated or imaginary, but rational thought has no place in plague-stricken society. People need explanations for the inexplicable, need someone to blame for the unbearable, and prejudices that existed before the plague are amplified and weaponized. But it's not just Jews who are targeted. Lepers, always marginalized in medieval society, are also accused of spreading plague. Some are killed, others are driven from their leper houses into the wilderness. Foreigners, anyone who looks or speaks differently, are viewed with suspicion. Beggars are accused of spreading disease deliberately. Prostitutes are blamed for moral corruption that supposedly invited divine wrath. Anyone on the margins of society becomes a potential scapegoat. There are also accusations of plague spreading within Christian communities. People accuse neighbors they don't like, claiming they saw them doing something suspicious near the well or performing suspicious rituals. Some accusations are motivated by genuine fear and paranoia. Others are cynical attempts to settle old grudges or seize property. A woman might accuse the widow who owns the neighboring field, hoping to acquire the land after the widow is executed. A debtor might accuse his creditor, eliminating the debt along with the person. The plague provides cover for all kinds of malice and greed. Your own town has been relatively restrained compared to stories you've heard from elsewhere. Only one Jewish family killed, as opposed to entire neighborhoods burned. But you know that if the plague continues much longer, the violence will escalate. People's desperation is growing, and desperate people are capable of terrible things. Elizabeth wakes briefly, and you give her water, holding the cup to her lips. She's deteriorated badly. The bubo under her arm has burst, draining continuously, and the smell of infection is overwhelming. Her fever is so high that her skin is burning to the touch. She's lost weight rapidly, her face gaunt, her eyes sunken. She looks at you without really seeing, her mind lost in delirium. "The children need to eat," she mumbles. "Have you fed them? Thomas is hungry. I can hear Margaret crying." "They're fine," you lie again, as gently as you can. "Rest now. Save your strength." She smiles faintly and closes her eyes. You know with absolute certainty that she'll die today, maybe in hours, maybe less. The signs are unmistakable to anyone who's watched plague victims die. The body is shutting down, the infection having spread too far for any recovery. Agnes is sitting in the corner, having retreated there during Father Benedict's visit. She's not crying anymore, just sitting silently, staring at nothing. The resilience of children is remarkable, but it has limits, and Agnes is approaching hers. She's lost her siblings, is watching her parents die, has witnessed murder in the streets, and has been hungry for days. How much can one 7-year-old endure before breaking completely? You try to think about what will happen to her after you die. Father Benedict has promised to care for her, but what does that mean practically? The church is overwhelmed. Resources are scarce, and there are dozens, maybe hundreds of orphans in town now. Will she be sent to a convent, raised as a nun? Will some family take her in, and if so, will they treat her well or use her as unpaid labor? Will she simply end up on the streets, one more beggar among many? The uncertainty is almost worse than the certainty of your own death. As afternoon fades toward evening, Elizabeth's breathing becomes more labored. The death rattle, they call it, the distinctive sound that means the end is near. You sit beside her, holding her hand, and Agnes joins you, sitting on the other side of the bed. The three of you are there together as Elizabeth takes her last few breaths, each one more difficult than the last, until finally she simply stops. The silence after that last breath is profound, a stillness that seems to fill the entire room. Agnes starts crying, and you hold her, though you're crying too. Elizabeth is gone. Your wife of 10 years, the mother of your children, the person you shared your life with, is dead. The plague has taken her, as it's taken millions of others across Europe. She's not special in her dying, not unique in her suffering. She's just one more victim in the greatest catastrophe medieval Europe has ever seen. You don't know how long you sit there, holding your daughter, crying over your wife's body. Time seems to have stopped, or maybe you've just stopped caring about it. Eventually, you know you'll need to report her death, have her body collected, make whatever arrangements can be made. But for now, you just sit in the growing darkness, mourning, and wondering how much longer you have before the plague claims you too. The death cart comes for Elizabeth's body the next morning. You've wrapped her in the bedsheet, the only shroud you can afford, and you and Agnes sit in silence as William and his assistant carry her out. They're efficient, almost mechanical in their movements, having done this hundreds of times now. They don't offer condolences, don't acknowledge your grief. There's no time for that when they have dozens more bodies to collect before noon. Elizabeth is loaded onto the cart next to 3 other corpses, and then the cart moves on, its wheels creaking, leaving you and Agnes alone in a room that suddenly feels enormous and empty. You know you should get up, should do something productive, but your body has other ideas. The fever has intensified overnight, and the bubo in your groin is now massive, a purple-black mass the size of an apple. The pain is constant, throbbing, radiating through your entire body. You're having difficulty walking, difficulty thinking clearly. The infection is winning, and you know that your time is measured in days at most, possibly hours. Agnes hasn't spoken since her mother died. She just sits on the bed, staring at the wall, occasionally crying quietly. You want to comfort her, want to tell her everything will be all right, but you can't lie to her anymore. Everything will not be all right. You're dying too, and soon she'll be completely alone, an orphan in a plague-stricken town with no family, no resources, no protection. The isolation of plague death is one of its cruelest aspects. In normal times, death is a communal event. When someone dies, the family gathers, neighbors visit, friends offer support. There are proper funeral rites, mourning periods, social structures that help the bereaved process their grief. But the plague has destroyed all of that. People are afraid to visit the sick, afraid to attend funerals, afraid even to comfort the grieving because any contact might mean infection. So you die alone, and your survivors mourn alone, cut off from the normal human connections that make loss bearable. You think about your parents, both long dead from causes that seemed significant at the time but are trivial compared to plague. Your father died from a fall, your mother from fever. You had proper funerals for both, with dozens of people attending, prayers said, meals shared. They were laid to rest in the churchyard with headstones marking their graves. Elizabeth will get none of that. She's already in a plague pit somewhere outside town, covered with quicklime and earth, her body indistinguishable from the hundreds of others dumped there. There's no marker, no memorial, no way for Agnes to visit her mother's grave in years to come. It's as if Elizabeth never existed. This erasure of the dead is happening throughout Europe. Entire families are being wiped out, with no one left to remember them or mourn them. Parish records that might preserve their names are spotty at best, often just noting plague next to dozens of entries without full details. Oral history, the stories passed down through families, is being severed as whole generations die. Children like Agnes, if they survive, will grow up with huge gaps in their family history, not knowing who their relatives were or what happened to them beyond. They died in the plague. Agnes finally speaks, her voice small and broken. "Papa, am I going to die too?" It's a question no child should have to ask, but it's the reality of her world. She's watched her siblings die, watched her mother die, and now she's watching you slowly succumb to the same disease. The odds of her surviving when everyone around her is dying seem impossibly small. You want to reassure her, but you also want to be honest. "I don't know, sweetheart," you say finally. "Some people survive, maybe you will." It's thin comfort, but it's all you have. You don't mention that children actually have slightly better survival rates than adults for some types of plague, probably because their immune systems are more robust. You don't know this fact, but you've observed that children sometimes recover when adults don't. Though plenty of children die too. Thomas and Margaret are proof of that. The question of why some people survive and others don't is one of the great mysteries of the plague. Medical understanding offers no explanation. It seems random, arbitrary. Two people with similar symptoms, similar treatments, similar living conditions, one lives and one dies. Physicians attribute it to differences in humoral balance or divine will, but neither explanation is particularly satisfying. The randomness is perhaps the most terrifying aspect. You can do everything right, pray properly, undergo treatments, avoid bad air, and still die. Or you can do nothing and survive. There's no guarantee, no formula for survival, no way to protect yourself with certainty. This randomness has led to a kind of fatalism in plague-stricken populations. If survival is essentially random, if God's choices are inscrutable, then why bother fighting? Some people have simply given up, stopped trying to avoid infection, stopped treating symptoms. They figure if they're meant to die, they'll die, and resistance is pointless. Others have gone the opposite direction, trying everything, every treatment and prayer and superstition, desperate to find some method that works. You're somewhere in between, too sick to fight much longer but not quite ready to surrender completely, if only for Agnes's sake. There's a knock at the door, and you open it to find Father Benedict again. He looks at you carefully, noting how much worse you've gotten, but he doesn't comment on it. "I've made arrangements," he says. "When?" "Afterwards. Agnes will stay with the sisters at the convent. They've agreed to take her in, raise her as one of their own. She'll be fed, clothed, educated. She'll have a future." It's more than you dared hope for. Convents are relatively safe from plague, being less crowded than towns and generally having better hygiene and resources. The nuns will care for Agnes, teach her to read and write, give her skills. She might even take vows herself someday and become a nun, or she might leave when she's older and marry. Either way, she'll survive, she'll have opportunities. It's a gift, and you struggle to thank Father Benedict through the tightness in your throat. When should she go? You ask, though you already know the answer. Now, while you're still alive to say goodbye properly, while you're still coherent enough to make the transition. If you wait until you're delirious or dead, it will be even harder for her. Father Benedict nods gently. Today would be best. This afternoon, perhaps. It will give you time to prepare her to say your goodbyes. He doesn't say, before you die, but it's understood. You nod your agreement, and he leaves, promising to return in a few hours. You sit down next to Agnes and try to explain. She needs to go live with the nuns. You won't be there, but they'll take care of her. She'll be safe, well-fed, happy. You're lying about the happy part, probably. Losing both parents and being shipped off to a convent at age 7 isn't exactly a recipe for happiness. But she'll survive, and right now, that's all that matters. Agnes understands more than you give her credit for. You're going to die like Mama, she says flatly. It's not a question. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak. She throws herself at you, sobbing, and you hold her tightly, trying to memorize this feeling, the weight of her in your arms, the sound of her crying, the smell of her hair. This is the last time you'll hold your daughter, and you want to make it count, want to somehow condense all the love and care and protection you would have given her over years into this one final embrace. I love you, you whisper. I love you so much, and I'm so proud of you. You're strong and brave and smart, and you're going to be all right. The nuns will help you, and you'll grow up to be an amazing woman. Your mother would be so proud. You're crying too now, both of you holding onto each other, trying to make these last hours together last forever, knowing they can't. The hours pass too quickly. You tell Agnes stories about her mother, about your wedding day, about when she was born. You tell her about Thomas and Margaret, trying to give her memories of siblings she's already half forgotten. You give her the wooden cross that belonged to your mother, the only family heirloom you have. Keep this, you say. Remember that you come from people who loved you, who would have done anything for you. Father Benedict returns as promised, and it's time. Agnes clings to you, not wanting to let go, and you have to pry her arms off gently. You have to be brave now, you say. Braver than you've ever been. Can you do that for me? She nods, though she's still crying, and Father Benedict takes her hand. He looks at you, his expression full of sympathy and sorrow, and then he leads Agnes out the door. She looks back once, her face streaked with tears, and then she's gone. You're alone now, truly alone for the first time in your adult life. No wife, no children, no family at all. Just you and the plague and the inevitable end approaching. You lie down on the bed, the same bed where Elizabeth died, where Thomas and Margaret died, where you've slept for 10 years. It seems fitting that you'll die here too, surrounded by ghosts and memories. The room is silent except for your breathing, which is becoming more labored as the plague's grip tightens. Your mind drifts, fever-induced hallucinations mixing with memories. You see Elizabeth as she was when you first met her, young and beautiful and laughing. You see Thomas taking his first steps, Margaret's first word. You see Agnes as a baby, so tiny and perfect, and you hope desperately that the convent will be good to her, that she'll find happiness somehow despite everything she's lost. Isolation was a plague prevention strategy in theory. Sick people were supposed to be quarantined, kept away from healthy individuals to prevent spread. Some towns implemented strict quarantines, locking infected families in their homes and posting guards to ensure they stayed there. This sometimes worked to slow spread, but it also meant people died alone, abandoned by their communities, sometimes starving to death if no one brought them food. Other towns didn't enforce quarantine at all, either because they lacked the resources or because people refused to comply. After all, if you're going to die anyway, why die locked up and alone when you could at least see your loved ones? Your own isolation now is voluntary in a sense. You could go out into the streets, could seek company, but what's the point? You're too weak to move much, and you don't want to spread the infection to anyone else. So you stay in your empty room, waiting for death, wondering how long it will take. Hours, a day. The uncertainty is its own torture. As night falls, you light a small oil lamp, not wanting to die in complete darkness. The flame flickers, casting moving shadows on the walls, and you watch them dance, losing yourself in the patterns. Your mind is becoming less clear, fever burning away coherent thought, leaving only fragments and feelings. Fear, sadness, resignation. A strange kind of peace that comes from knowing the struggle is almost over. You think about survival, about what it meant in plague times. It wasn't heroic or noble. It was desperate and often selfish. People abandoned their families to save themselves. Communities turned on each other, seeking scapegoats. The social bonds that held society together frayed and broke under the strain. And yet, somehow, some people did survive. Through luck, through isolation, through randomness, through prayer, through means no one fully understood, some people made it through the plague alive. They would rebuild, repopulate, create new families and communities. But that's the future, and you won't be part of it. Your story ends here in this room, alone, one more anonymous victim in history's greatest pandemic. You wake from fevered dreams to find sunlight streaming through the window. You're still alive, which is somehow surprising. The pain has changed, become less sharp and more of a general agony that encompasses your entire body. The bubo in your groin has burst during the night, soaking the bed with pus and blood. Ordinarily, this might be a good sign, the infection draining, potentially giving your body a chance to recover. But you're too far gone. The bacteria have spread throughout your system, and one draining bubo won't save you now. From the window, you can hear sounds that are both familiar and wrong. There's shouting, but not the normal marketplace bustle. This is different, angrier, more chaotic. You drag yourself to the window and look out at a town that's collapsing before your eyes. The social order that held even in the worst days of the plague is finally breaking down completely. A group of men is breaking into a house across the street, a wealthy merchant's home. The merchant died last week, and his widow fled to relatives in the countryside, abandoning the property. Now looters are taking anything of value. You watch as they carry out furniture, chests of clothes, bags of grain from the merchant's stores. There's no one to stop them. The town watch, what's left of it, either doesn't care or can't enforce order with their depleted numbers. The normal rules of property and law have ceased to function. Further down the street, you see a more disturbing scene. Two men are fighting over a dead body, specifically over the boots the corpse is wearing. Boots are valuable, and the dead don't need them. One man prevails, pulling the boots off and running away with his prize while the other man curses him. The body is left lying in the street, partially stripped, just another piece of the landscape in a plague town where corpses are so common they're barely noticed anymore. The collapse isn't just material. The entire structure of medieval society is disintegrating. The feudal system depended on everyone knowing their place and performing their role. Peasants worked the land, lords protected the people, clergy ministered to souls, merchants facilitated trade. But the plague has killed so many people that these roles can't be filled. Entire villages have been abandoned. Lords have no peasants to work their land. The church has lost so many clergy that services can't be conducted properly. Trade networks have collapsed because there aren't enough merchants or enough customers. One of the most significant changes is in labor relations. Before the plague, labor was cheap and abundant. If a peasant demanded higher wages or better conditions, he could be easily replaced. But now, with half or more of the working population dead, labor is scarce and valuable. The few surviving workers are demanding higher wages, refusing to work for the traditional rates. Lords and employers are furious, passing laws to try to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, but these laws are largely unenforceable. A worker who can earn triple the traditional wage by going to the next town over isn't going to be stopped by a law the undermanned authorities can't enforce. This economic shift will have profound long-term effects. The plague is inadvertently beginning the process that will eventually end serfdom. When workers are scarce and valuable, they gain bargaining power. They can demand freedom, better conditions, actual wages instead of just subsistence. But that's decades in the future. Right now, in the immediate aftermath, it just looks like chaos, people abandoning traditional obligations, moving freely in search of better opportunities, and no one with the power to stop them. You think about your own position in this collapsing world. You were a carpenter, a skilled tradesman, not wealthy but respectable. You paid your taxes, attended church, followed the rules. But the plague has rendered all of that meaningless. Your skills are worthless when no one is building anything. Your respectability means nothing when social bonds have dissolved. Your rule-following looks like foolishness when rule breakers are looting with impunity and no one is punished. If you were healthy, if you were going to survive, you could probably do well in this new world. Skilled workers who survive the plague will be in high demand, able to command wages that would have been unthinkable before. Craftsmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, they'll be able to write their own terms. Even unskilled laborers will have opportunities. But you're not going to survive. This hypothetical future prosperity is not for you. It's for the lucky few who make it through, who get to rebuild. The plague has also revealed something about human nature that's both hopeful and depressing. Some people become more compassionate in crisis, more generous, more willing to help others despite personal risk. You think of Father Benedict, continuing to minister to the sick and dying when he could have fled. You think of Dr. Blackwood, whatever his flaws, still treating patients when most physicians ran away. You think of people who have taken in orphans, shared food with neighbors, maintained their humanity even as the world burned around them. But for every person who becomes more compassionate, there are others who become more selfish, more cruel, more willing to exploit others' suffering for personal gain. The merchants charging triple for bread, the looters stealing from the dead and dying, the mobs murdering innocents as scapegoats, the landlords evicting plague widows so they can rent to someone who can pay. Human nature, it turns out, is not uniformly good or evil. It's situational, dependent on circumstances, and catastrophe brings out extremes in both directions. Your own actions during the plague have been neither particularly heroic nor particularly villainous. You've tried to care for your family. You've made the necessary calculations about survival. You've been afraid, desperate, sometimes selfish in that desperation. You didn't stand up for Samuel when the mob killed him, didn't offer to take in any orphans, didn't volunteer for dangerous work helping plague victims. But you also didn't loot, didn't participate in scapegoating, didn't abandon your family to save yourself. You were just ordinary. Trying to survive, trying to protect your loved ones, failing ultimately, but at least trying. Is that enough? You're not sure. You'll face God soon if God exists, if there's an afterlife, and you'll have to account for your actions. What will you say? That you did your best in impossible circumstances? That you were a good enough person, not perfect, but trying? Or will your failures loom larger? Your cowardice in the face of injustice? your inability to save your family, your moments of selfishness and despair. Medieval Christianity promised that plague was punishment for sin, and that salvation required penance and faith. But what if it's simpler than that? What if the plague is just disease, bacteria spread by fleas, with no moral dimension at all? What if survival is purely random, unrelated to virtue or wickedness? What if people like you die while worse people live simply because of chance? The theological implications are disturbing, suggesting a universe that's indifferent to human suffering, where good and evil don't determine outcomes and prayer doesn't influence events. These are heretical thoughts, the kind that could get you burned if you voice them publicly in normal times. But these aren't normal times, and you're dying anyway, so you allow yourself to think them. Maybe the plague isn't divine punishment. Maybe it's just a natural disaster, like an earthquake or flood. Maybe God isn't involved at all, or if he is, he's too distant to intervene in human affairs. Maybe religion is just a framework people created to make sense of randomness and suffering, comforting lies we tell ourselves because the truth, that we're alone in an indifferent universe, is too terrifying to face. Or maybe not. Maybe there is meaning, purpose, divine justice operating on a scale too large for humans to comprehend. Maybe your suffering and death serve some greater good you can't see. Maybe Agnes surviving is proof that God is merciful, that he preserved at least one member of your family. Maybe reunion with Elizabeth and your children awaits you in heaven, and this brief earthly suffering will be forgotten in eternal joy. You want to believe this, desperately want to believe there's meaning to all the pain, but faith is hard when you're dying of plague in a world that seems to be ending. Outside your window, the chaos continues. Someone is setting fire to a house, whether to purify it after plague deaths or just out of destructive impulse. You can't tell. The fire spreads to neighboring buildings, and you hear people shouting, trying to organize a response, but it's half-hearted. There aren't enough healthy people to fight fires effectively, and many don't see the point. If the whole town burns down, maybe that's just fitting. Maybe fire is the only way to truly cleanse the plague. You lie back down, exhausted from the effort of sitting up. Your breathing is becoming more difficult, and you know the end is close now. Hours at most. Your life is ending in this room, alone, in a town that's falling apart, in a world that will be fundamentally changed by the plague. Historians will write about this, you think dimly. The Black Death will be remembered as one of history's greatest catastrophes. But they'll write about statistics, about social changes, about economic impacts. They won't write about you specifically, about your family, about the individual suffering of millions of ordinary people. You'll just be a number, one of the estimated 25 million Europeans killed by plague, a statistic in a paragraph describing mass death. But you were real. Your life mattered, at least to you, to Elizabeth, to Thomas and Margaret and Agnes. You loved and were loved. You worked and built things. You laughed and cried and hoped and feared. You were a person, not just a number, and even though history won't remember your name, even though there will be no monument or memorial, you existed. You lived through humanity's darkest hour and tried your best, and maybe that's all anyone can do. As consciousness fades, as the fever burns away the last of your awareness, your final thoughts are of Agnes. You hope she'll be all right, hope the convent will treat her well, hope she'll find happiness somehow. You hope she'll remember you and her mother and her siblings with love, not just with trauma. You hope she'll have a future, that she'll survive not just physically but emotionally, that she'll be able to build a life from the ruins of her childhood. It's a small hope, but it's all you have left to give her. You don't wake up again. Your body, exhausted from fighting an unwinnable battle, simply stops. The death cart collects you the next morning, your body wrapped in the same blood-stained sheet that held your wife, and you're taken to the plague pits outside town. No funeral, no prayers, no mourning. Just another body in a mass grave, indistinguishable from thousands of others. Your life, with all its struggles and small triumphs, its loves and losses, ends not with significance but with anonymity. But this isn't quite the end of the story. Because Agnes survives. Against all odds, despite exposure to plague, despite losing her entire family, despite trauma that would break many adults, 7-year-old Agnes lives. She's taken to the convent as promised, and the nuns, themselves diminished by plague but still functioning, welcome her. She's given a small bed in the dormitory, taught prayers and lessons, fed simple but adequate meals. It's not a joyful childhood, but it's a childhood, and that's more than many plague orphans receive. The convent becomes her world. She learns to read and write, unusual skills for a girl of her background. She learns herbalism, how to prepare medicines, how to tend the sick. The nuns are kind, generally, though strict, and they give Agnes structure and purpose. She never forgets her family, never stops missing them, but gradually the acute pain of loss dulls to a more manageable ache. She grows up, becomes a young woman, and eventually, when she's old enough to choose, she takes her vows and becomes Sister Agnes, dedicating her life to God and to caring for others. She lives to be 63, an impressive age in medieval times, and she spends her adult life as a healer, using the skills she learned at the convent to help the sick. She never marries, never has children of her own, but she touches thousands of lives through her work. She remembers her parents, her siblings, the plague that took them. Sometimes she tells the younger nuns about it, wanting the memory preserved, wanting people to know what it was like. But mostly she looks forward, not back, because looking back is too painful. This is one kind of survival story. Agnes survived physically, yes, but also emotionally, psychologically, building a life from trauma and loss. But she's just one person. What about the broader survival? What about the town, the region, Europe as a whole? The plague, the Black Death of 1347-1353, kills between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population. Some regions lose even more. Entire villages are wiped out completely, abandoned, never resettled. The demographic catastrophe is unprecedented. It will take Europe more than 150 years to return to pre-plague population levels. The social, economic, and cultural impacts are profound and long-lasting. In the immediate aftermath, there's chaos. The social order has collapsed, and it takes time to rebuild. Survivors face a world with empty houses, vacant fields, abandoned workshops. There's plenty of everything: land, goods, resources, because there aren't enough people left to use them. This creates opportunities for social mobility that didn't exist before. Peasants can acquire land, craftsmen can demand higher wages, women can find work in previously male-dominated fields because there simply aren't enough men left alive. The feudal system, already showing cracks before the plague, begins its long decline. When labor is scarce, workers have power. They can negotiate, refuse bad terms, move to better opportunities. Lords try to resist, passing laws to freeze wages and restrict movement, but enforcement is impossible. The old certainty that everyone would stay in their ordained place has evaporated. Social rigidity gives way to flexibility, and while it's chaotic at first, it eventually leads to greater freedom and opportunity. The church's authority is also weakened. The massive death toll among clergy, combined with the obvious failure of prayers and religious rituals to stop the plague, causes many people to question church teachings. Why did God allow this? Why did prayers go unanswered? Why did the righteous suffer alongside the wicked? These questions don't have satisfactory answers, and doubt spreads. The church will continue as a powerful institution, but it will never again have the unquestioned authority it enjoyed before the plague. There are cultural shifts, too. Art becomes darker, more focused on death and mortality. The dance of death motif appears, showing skeletal figures dancing with people from all walks of life, reminding viewers that death comes for everyone eventually. Literature begins exploring themes of randomness and meaninglessness. The confident, structured world of medieval Christianity is giving way to something more uncertain, more questioning. The Renaissance, with its humanist focus and scientific inquiry, is still a century away, but the plague has planted seeds of doubt and change. Medical understanding begins to slowly shift as well. The plague's resistance to traditional treatments forces physicians to reconsider their theories. While it will be centuries before germ theory is discovered, there's gradual movement toward more empirical, observational approaches to medicine. Some cities begin implementing quarantine procedures, not understanding why they work, but observing that they sometimes do. Public health as a concept starts to emerge, the idea that communities can take collective action to prevent disease. The survivors, people like Agnes and thousands of others who lost everything but somehow kept going, rebuild. They create new families, new communities, new structures to replace what was lost. They carry trauma with them, of course. Entire generations are marked by plague experience, and they pass that trauma to their children in subtle ways. But they also pass on resilience, the knowledge that humanity can survive even the worst catastrophes, that life continues even after horror. For you, personally, there is no aftermath. Your story ends in that plague pit, your body decomposing alongside millions of others. But in a way, you live on through Agnes. She carries memories of you, tells stories about her family to the younger nuns. Your carpentry skills, the careful way you built things, influences her approach to her own work, the methodical care she takes with medicines and treatments. You're not physically present, but your impact ripples forward through time. This is the ultimate truth about plague survival. It's not just about staying alive physically. It's about preserving memory, maintaining humanity, creating meaning from suffering. Most plague victims died, yes, but humanity survived. The species continued. And in continuing, people honored those who died by building a world where such catastrophes might be prevented or mitigated. You, lying in your plague pit, didn't get to see any of this. You died in despair, believing the world was ending, believing your life had been pointless. But you were wrong. Your life mattered. Your love for your family mattered. Your attempt to protect Agnes, even when you couldn't save the others, mattered. Because Agnes survived, and through her, something of you survived too. So let's talk about what surviving the plague really means, and what lessons it holds for us, centuries later, comfortable in our modern lives with our antibiotics and our understanding of bacteria and our public health systems. Could you have survived the medieval plague? Physically, probably not. Your immune system, no better than medieval immune systems, would likely fail against Yersinia pestis, the bacteria that causes plague. Without modern medicine, your survival would be about luck more than anything else. Random genetic variations that make some people slightly more resistant. Being in the right place at the right time. Not being bitten by the particular fleas that carried infection. Pure chance, essentially. But physical survival isn't the only kind. Could you have survived psychologically? Could you have maintained your sanity while watching everyone around you die? Could you have kept your humanity when society collapsed into scapegoating and violence? Could you have continued caring for your sick children even knowing you'd likely get infected? Could you have found meaning in meaningless suffering? These are harder questions, and the answers vary person to person. What the plague teaches us is that humans are capable of both tremendous cruelty and tremendous compassion in crisis. We can be the mob murdering innocent people as scapegoats, or we can be Father Benedict, staying to help when fleeing would be safer. We can be looters stealing from the dead, or we can be the nuns taking in orphans. Crisis doesn't create these capacities, it reveals them. The potential for both has always been there. The plague also teaches us about the fragility of civilization. Medieval society seemed solid, structured, eternal. The feudal system had existed for centuries and seemed likely to continue for centuries more. The church's authority was unquestioned. Social roles were fixed. And then, in just a few years, the plague destroyed it all. Everything that seemed permanent turned out to be contingent, dependent on having enough people alive to maintain systems. When those people died, the systems collapsed, revealing how thin the veneer of civilization really is. But here's the hopeful part: civilization rebuilt. It took time, took effort, took the resilience of survivors like Agnes who refused to give up. But it happened. The world after the plague was different from the world before, in some ways better, with more opportunities for common people, less rigid hierarchy, eventual scientific advancement. The plague was catastrophic, yes, but it wasn't apocalyptic. Humanity survived, adapted, continued. As you lie here tonight, safe in your modern home, protected by medicine and public health systems that medieval people couldn't imagine, think about those plague survivors. Think about Agnes, 7 years old, orphaned, traumatized, with every reason to give up, who instead chose to live, to build a new life, to help others. Think about the millions of ordinary people who faced the worst crisis in European history and somehow got through it. You wouldn't have lasted long in plague times, probably. The disease would have killed you, or the starvation, or the violence, or the despair. But maybe, just maybe, you would have been one of the survivors. Maybe you would have found reserves of strength you didn't know you had. Maybe you would have been kind when kindness was dangerous. Maybe you would have chosen hope when hope seemed irrational. We can't know, but the plague survivors show us it's possible. The Black Death was one of history's greatest catastrophes. It killed more than 25 million people in Europe alone, maybe 200 million worldwide. It destroyed societies, economies, cultures. It caused suffering beyond imagination. And yet, humanity survived. Scarred, changed, diminished, but not destroyed. That's the ultimate lesson: humans are resilient. We endure. We rebuild. We find meaning even in meaningless tragedy. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, be grateful for the modern world with all its problems. Be grateful for antibiotics and vaccines and sanitation systems. Be grateful that plague is now treatable, that you live in an era where bacterial infections don't mean automatic death. But also remember the plague survivors. Remember their courage and their suffering and their resilience. Remember that you come from a long line of survivors, people who faced horrors you can't imagine and somehow kept going. Remember Agnes, working as a healer into her 60s, carrying memories of her lost family but building a life anyway. Remember Elizabeth, dying delirious but still concerned about her children. Remember the nameless carpenter, your guide through this plague journey, who died trying to protect his daughter. Remember the millions of ordinary people whose names we don't know but who lived and loved and struggled and died during humanity's darkest hour. They survived the plague, or they died trying, and either way, they were human. Fully human, with all the flaws and strengths that implies. And you're human too, part of that same species that endured the Black Death and will endure whatever comes next. That's worth remembering. That's worth honoring. So sleep well, knowing you live in gentler times, but also knowing that if you had to, if circumstances demanded it, you might have that same resilience buried somewhere inside you. Might. We can hope, and hope ultimately is what the plague survivors had when they had nothing else. Rest well, and remember, good night.